"You don't belong here," the flight attendant barked in front of everyone. What she didn't know? The woman she humiliated could summon the CEO with just one call. Vanessa Coleman was no stranger to being underestimated. But today wasn't about law or courtrooms. Today, she just wanted to get home. She arrived at JFK Airport early, rolling her sleek black carry-on and a leather tote bag with practiced ease. Her outfit was crisp, navy pantsuit, white silk blouse, low heels, and a subtle pin that read U.S. Judiciary. Her salt and pepper curls framed a face that carried both warmth and strength. Most people would never guess she was a federal judge, and she preferred it that way. As she approached the gate, a few glances lingered. She smiled politely, handed her boarding pass to the agent, and was ushered into early boarding. Vanessa settled into seat 2A, a window seat in business class. She removed a folder labeled Reentry Program Review and a well-worn paperback of Beloved by Toni Morrison from her bag, intending to read during the flight. She crossed her legs and exhaled. The week had been intense: panel discussions, legal consultations, and a keynote address on reforming juvenile sentencing. Her voice had inspired dozens, perhaps hundreds, but no one on this flight knew that. She liked it that way. Passengers began to board slowly. Some smiled at her. A few nodded. She returned each gesture with grace. And then, it happened that a blonde flight attendant with a rigid smile approached her row. Her name tag read Kimberly. She looked around, then at Vanessa. There was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Excuse me," Kimberly said, voice tight. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Vanessa looked up, surprised but unfazed. "Of course," she replied, handing it over. Kimberly examined it and frowned slightly. "This is business class." "Yes," Vanessa said. "Seat 2A." "Ma'am," Kimberly said, louder now, "you're in the wrong seat. This section is reserved for business class." A pause. Heads turned. "I am in the correct seat," Vanessa said, calmly pointing to the seat number printed on the pass. 2A business class. Kimberly's expression didn't soften. "You might have been upgraded by mistake, or there was a glitch in the system. I'll need you to move." A murmur ran through the cabin. The man seated across the aisle looked up from his laptop. A couple in the next row exchanged uneasy glances. Vanessa felt every eye on her. The heat of humiliation crept up her neck, but she kept her composure. "I booked this seat myself weeks ago," Vanessa explained. "There's no mistake." Kimberly took a step back, but didn't apologize. Instead, she sighed and added, "I've had people try to sneak into this section before. It's nothing personal." But of course it was. Vanessa inhaled. The old part of her, the younger version who once had to fight for respect in Ivy League classrooms, wanted to raise her voice. But that wasn't her way. Not anymore. She pulled out her phone. "Is there a problem here?" A calm male voice interrupted. It was the man in 2B, a white man in his late 50s. He wore a wedding ring and had the soft but commanding tone of someone used to de-escalating situations. "I've been sitting here the whole time," he continued. "She's done absolutely nothing wrong. She belongs in this seat." Kimberly flinched but didn't reply. Vanessa looked at the man and nodded in silent gratitude. Then she turned her focus back to the screen. She wasn't calling security. She wasn't calling a lawyer. She was calling the one person who could truly shift the power dynamic on this flight. "Hello, Marie," she said gently into the phone. "I'm on flight 728, gate 14. Can you connect me to Mr. Daniels? Tell him Judge Coleman needs a moment of his time." No threats. No raised voices. Just clarity. That moment, something shifted in the cabin. Passengers straightened up. A few pulled out their phones, sensing something big was unfolding. Kimberly retreated toward the galley but kept glancing back. Her smile had vanished. Vanessa placed the phone back in her tote and opened her book. The hum of the engines grew louder. She didn't need to say another word. The call had been made. Kimberly returned a few minutes later with another flight attendant in tow, whispering something behind her hand. They both glanced at Vanessa, but this time, they kept their distance. The entire energy had shifted. The other attendant looked far more composed, and perhaps concerned about the escalation. Vanessa, meanwhile, resumed reading her book as if nothing had happened. But her ears were tuned to every murmur, every shuffle of unease. Passengers were unsettled. Not just because of the scene, but because of the woman's calm. It wasn't just dignified. It was deliberate. There was power in her silence. and people were beginning to realize they'd misjudged who she was. The man in 2B leaned slightly toward her. "You handled that with grace," he said quietly. "Thank you," Vanessa replied, without looking up. "I don't mean to intrude," he continued, "but if you ever decide to run for Senate, I'd vote for you." Vanessa smiled, finally meeting his eyes. "I prefer staying where I can make real changes," she said, away from cameras. Just then, a flight operations manager stepped onto the plane. He wasn't supposed to be there, but something urgent had been relayed from the gate. He glanced down the business class aisle, spotted Vanessa, and approached her seat respectfully. "Judge Coleman," he said softly, "Mr. Daniels asked me to extend his apologies and to let you know that he's addressing this immediately. He'll speak with you personally after the flight." Kimberly, watching from the galley, went pale. Vanessa nodded and thanked the manager. It was all done quietly. No drama, no shouting. But everyone watching knew. This woman had just changed the balance of power midair with a simple phone call. Kimberly didn't return for the rest of the flight. Another attendant took over Vanessa's section, offering refreshments with a noticeably different tone. By the time the flight touched down in Dallas, the whispers had turned into wide eyes and long stares. Everyone now wanted to know, who was that woman? As they began to disembark, Vanessa remained seated until the aisle cleared. The man from 2B waited with her. "Whatever happens next," he said, "thank you for not letting it slide. That kind of treatment happens too often." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Exactly why I didn't let it go." At the jet bridge, a black SUV was already waiting. A well-dressed assistant held the door open. "Judge Coleman, Mr. Daniels is waiting in the lounge," the assistant said. Kimberly passed by, clutching her bag, avoiding eye contact. Her supervisor walked silently beside her. No one raised their voice. No one made a scene, but consequences had arrived. Quiet, sharp, and undeniable. One quiet phone call turned into a corporate emergency. The woman they tried to embarrass? She just became the most important passenger on the plane. The moment Vanessa stepped off the aircraft, she was met with silent stares from staff, from fellow passengers, from Kimberly, the flight attendant who had gone completely pale. But Vanessa didn't acknowledge any of it. She kept her posture straight, her chin high, and walked with the same calm resolve that had guided her through decades of quiet battles. At the end of the jet bridge, a man in a tailored gray suit waited with his hands clasped in front of him. His name tag read E. Daniels, Chief Executive Officer. He stepped forward, his face a mixture of embarrassment and deference. "Judge Coleman," he said, "thank you for allowing me a moment of your time." Vanessa looked him in the eyes. "Let's speak somewhere private." A nearby lounge had already been cleared. Inside, the lighting was warm, the chairs comfortable, and a tray of refreshments sat untouched on the table. Daniels gestured toward a seat, but Vanessa remained standing. "Mr. Daniels," she began, "I don't need an apology for my ego. I'm used to being underestimated. But I do need to know, how often does your staff assume a woman like me doesn't belong where she rightfully is?" Daniels blinked. "Far too often, I'm afraid." "And what happens when the cameras aren't rolling?" she asked. "What happens to the passengers who aren't federal judges?" He didn't have an answer. Not a good one. Anyway, Vanessa finally sat down. "I don't want media attention. I don't want a press release. What I want is change. Internal training, equity audits, and accountability." "You'll have it," Daniels said, almost immediately. "We've been revising our DI program. I'll make sure it starts with this." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Starts with me?" "No. It should have started years ago." Silence settled between them. She stood up again, extending her hand. "I trust you'll do the right thing. Because if not, I won't be quiet next time." Daniels shook her hand, his grip firm but clearly shaken. "Yes, Your Honor." Back in the terminal, Kimberly was being led into a private meeting room by her supervisor and a company HR manager. Her steps were slow now. Gone was the commanding tone, the fake smile. In its place was something more fragile: fear? Regret? She didn't know yet that her actions had reached the company's boardroom. She didn't know that hundreds of passengers had witnessed the exchange. She didn't know someone in 2C had already uploaded a short clip to TikTok titled, "Judge versus Flight Attendant. You messed with the wrong one." It was going viral. Meanwhile, in the back of the terminal, Vanessa sat on a quiet bench, her carry-on at her feet, her book unopened. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said, "I saw what happened. I just wanted to say thank you." Vanessa looked up. "I work in tech," the young woman continued. "I've been told I didn't belong more times than I can count. Watching you handle that with such calm, it meant something." Vanessa smiled gently. "Never let them define your space for you." "I won't," the young woman said. "Not after today." As Vanessa headed toward the exit, her phone buzzed. It was her clerk. "Clerk, text, your moment on flight 728 is trending on X. And by the way, you're everyone's hero today." She smiled, but quickly silenced the screen. She hadn't done it for the internet. She hadn't even done it for herself. She had done it for every quiet, brilliant, underestimated woman who'd ever been told they were sitting in the wrong seat. They thought it was over when she left the plane, until her phone call triggered an emergency meeting at the highest level of the airline. Why the next morning, the story had spread beyond a single terminal, beyond a viral clip, and far beyond Flight 728. In the downtown headquarters of Altura Airlines, a conference room full of executives sat in tense silence, eyes locked on a flat screen replaying the security footage from Gate 14. There was no audio, but the image was clear. A composed black woman calmly handing over her boarding pass, the visible dismissal in the attendant's posture, and the stunned faces of passengers nearby. "That's Judge Vanessa Coleman," murmured one of the VPs, voice almost reverent. "Not just a judge," corrected another. "She was keynote speaker at the American Legal Equity Conference last week. She's a national figure in criminal justice reform." The CEO, Edward Daniels, who had personally met Vanessa in the lounge hours earlier, rubbed his forehead. "This is the kind of moment that defines how we respond as a company," he said. She asked for accountability. "We either deliver, or we become the headline." He glanced at the head of HR. "Status of the attendant?" "She's been placed on paid leave pending review," the woman replied. Daniels shook his head. "Make it unpaid, and start the review now." Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in her sunlit home office in Dallas, sipping tea and reading case notes. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from colleagues, friends, former law clerks. Some sent screenshots of social media posts. "That judge is a queen. Calm power. That's what justice looks like. Airline tried it. She ended it." Others were more sobering. One message read, "Vanessa, what happened to you happens to my students all the time. But they don't have your badge. Or your poise." That one stuck with her. She opened her laptop and drafted a message, short, professional, and pointed. To Edward Daniels subject. Follow-up on Flight 728. Dear Mr. Daniels, as discussed, I am not seeking publicity or compensation. However, I do expect written confirmation of the actions your company is taking to ensure passengers of all backgrounds are treated with dignity and fairness. Training, evaluation, and cultural accountability are no longer optional. That I look forward to your written response by end of week. Sincerely, Honorable Vanessa L. Coleman. Later that day, Vanessa took a walk through her neighborhood park. The breeze was gentle, and the sky painted soft hues of pink and blue. A teenage girl jogging past paused and turned around. "Excuse me," she said breathlessly. "Are you the judge from that plane video?" Vanessa nodded. "My mom showed it to me," the girl said. "She said you didn't even raise your voice. That was strong." Vanessa smiled. "Strength doesn't always have to shout." The girl beamed. "I want to be a lawyer one day. Maybe a judge." "Then start now," Vanessa said. "Practice standing tall in small moments. That's how we build for the big ones." Back at Altura's headquarters, the airline's internal systems were buzzing too. Daniels had commissioned a full review of staff training protocols. A confidential survey went out to 2,000 employees across departments. One anonymous response read, "I've seen this before. Not always on purpose, but bias is real. This time we got caught." Another said, "She was calm because she's a judge. What about the ones who don't know their rights?" Daniels read them all. He scheduled a town hall for the next week, mandatory for all regional leads and in-flight staff managers. The topic, unconscious bias and passenger dignity. For the first time in years, Altura's culture team had an actual mandate. Not just diversity posters or vague promises, but direct action rooted in a real incident with real consequences. All because one woman made one phone call to AT home. Vanessa received a package the next morning. Inside was a handwritten note. "To Judge Coleman, thank you for challenging us to be better. You've inspired more than you know." E. Daniels. Under the note was a single silver pin. It was engraved with the scales of justice, and the airline's emblem beside it. Subtle, but unmistakable. Vanessa held it for a moment, then placed it beside her father's photo on the mantle. He had always told her, "There's power in restraint." But never mistake it for weakness. She had never forgotten. She didn't raise her voice, but the whole internet did it for her. What started as a quiet insult became a national reckoning. By the end of the week, hashtags like hashtag Seat2A, hashtag Judge Coleman, and hashtag Fly with Respect were trending on multiple platforms. Clips of the incident had been reposted across TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter, with millions of views pouring in. One popular video. A Gen Z creator reenacted the moment. When the flight attendant tells you to move, but you're a federal judge and she's about to be out of a job. The comment section was flooded. "This is why we stay calm. That woman just changed aviation policy without yelling once." Her silence was louder than a lawsuit. Some users dug deeper, finding Vanessa's speeches and articles. Others began sharing their own stories of racial bias while traveling. Within 48 hours, what began as a viral moment had grown into a broader movement, a collective retelling of everyday indignities. Vanessa, meanwhile, remained largely offline. She gave no interviews, declined all media requests, and simply went back to work. But the world wasn't done with her story. One afternoon, she arrived at the local courthouse where she presided part-time. As she walked toward the courtroom, the building clerk smiled warmly. "Never seen this place get so much media mail, Judge," she said, holding up a stack of letters. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. The top envelope was from a school in Kansas. The next from a women's prison in California. Inside were handwritten letters, drawings, thank you notes. Some came from teenage girls. Some came from grown men who had spent years wrongly judged. One read, "I watched you sit there with such power in your silence. I've been shouted at before too. Thank you for showing us how to respond." Another said, "Your restraint was revolutionary." Vanessa placed the letters in a folder, closed her door, and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Back at Altura Airlines headquarters, the pressure was mounting from shareholders and the press. Their PR department had released a brief statement. "We regret the incident on Flight 728 and are working directly with Judge Coleman to ensure a path toward accountability, training, and restorative change." But people wanted more than apologies. They wanted action. Daniels knew this. And he also knew that Vanessa had given him a gift by choosing not to take the story to every national outlet. Her silence had given him time to respond honestly, not reactively. He convened a second meeting, this time including key voices from employee resource groups, flight staff unions, and DI consultants. Down on the table, a new protocol called Clear Access, designed to require bias training for all customer-facing staff, implement anonymous passenger feedback tied to specific flights, establish a justice review board, including external civil rights advisors. It was the most aggressive cultural reform plan in the airline's recent history. But Daniels wasn't trying to impress the board. He was trying to do right by a woman who could have ruined them, but didn't. On a rainy Thursday evening, Vanessa received a call. "Ma'am," said the voice on the other line, "my name is Roger Fields. I'm the director of flight operations for Altura. I was asked to personally walk you through the changes being implemented." Vanessa listened as he outlined the protocols. When he finished, he asked, "Is there anything you feel we've missed?" There was a pause. Then Vanessa said, "Yes. I want your attendants to be trained in presence. Not just policy. I want them to learn how to read the dignity in people, even when it looks different from what they expect." Roger was quiet for a beat. "We'll include it. Also," Vanessa added, "if any of your young staff want to understand what that dignity looks like in action, send them to my courtroom. They're welcome to observe anytime." It was an offer and a challenge. The next day, Kimberly received her formal termination notice. She had the right to appeal. She chose not to in her exit interview. She simply said, "I judged her before I knew her, and I got exactly what I deserved." Some called her a scapegoat. Others said she should have been fired sooner. But the truth? She wasn't just a symbol. She was a symptom, a product of years of unchecked assumptions. Vanessa didn't ask for her firing. She asked for a shift. And now, that shift had begun. 3 months had passed since the incident on Flight 728. That Vanessa Coleman had returned to her quiet rhythm of court hearings, policy consulting, and mentoring young law students. But beneath the surface, things were no longer quite the same. Airlines across the country had quietly begun reviewing their staff conduct training. Altura's clear access protocol had made waves in internal aviation networks, and other carriers began drafting their own versions, some more genuine than others. Vanessa never spoke about the incident publicly. She never used it as leverage. Never posted a single tweet. She had no need to. The world had already done that for her. But change kept echoing outward. In Washington, D.C., a congressional hearing on airline discrimination was convened. One of the opening testimonies cited the Judge Coleman incident as a tipping point for reevaluating implicit bias in air travel. At the same time, a group of law students at Howard University launched a campaign called Dignity on Board, aimed at lobbying for a passenger bill of rights rooted in fairness, not just compensation. Vanessa had inspired them without even knowing it. Meanwhile, at Altura Airlines, CEO Edward Daniels stood before his board of directors to present quarterly results. "Customer satisfaction is up," he said. "Complaints related to in-flight treatment are down 19% since the implementation of Clear Access." He paused before adding, "But this isn't about numbers. It's about trust. We nearly lost it with a single interaction, and we were given the grace of a second chance by someone who could have gone to war with us and chose not to." A board member asked, "Have we heard from her again?" Daniels nodded. "No, she doesn't need to say anything else." Her silence did what a lawsuit never could. One Saturday morning, Vanessa received an invitation in the mail. It was for a leadership award from a civil rights foundation she deeply respected. At first, she hesitated. The spotlight had never been her goal, but her teenage niece, Jasmine, convinced her. "You always tell me not to hide my voice. Maybe it's time you stop hiding your example." Vanessa smiled. "That's not the same." "It is to me," Jasmine said. "You didn't just sit in your seat. You changed who's allowed to sit in theirs." Vanessa looked down at the silver pin on her lapel, the one the airline had sent weeks earlier. She thought of her mother, her grandmother, the women who had been moved from seats on buses, benches, boardrooms. She wasn't here by accident. She was here because someone before her had not moved. The award ceremony was elegant, but not extravagant. During her speech, Vanessa kept it short. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said. "I just stayed seated." The power wasn't in standing up or shouting. It was in not moving when someone tried to make me feel small. She glanced at the young women in the front row, many of them students. "You don't need a gavel to carry authority. You don't need a title to demand dignity. All you need is the courage to remain exactly where you belong." The audience gave her a standing ovation, not out of celebrity, but out of recognition. Back at home that night, Vanessa sat by the window with a warm mug of tea, watching airplanes blink across the night sky. Her phone buzzed once. A message from a number she didn't recognize. Text: "I was the guy in 2B. You may not remember me, but I remember you. Just wanted to say thank you." Vanessa smiled. She remembered him. She remembered everything. In a world that often tries to move women like her out of sight, out of power, or out of place, Vanessa Coleman had remained. Unshaken, unapologetic, unmoved, and from seat 2A, she had shifted the sky itself.